After my son's wedding, my mother-in-law came up to me and said, "Your business will be mine, and if you don't agree, it will be worse." She took my bakery shop, but she didn't know what would happen to her.
I had always believed that bread was more than just flour, yeast, and water. Bread was memory. Bread was patience. Bread was the smell that lingers in a home long after the oven cools down. For 30 years, my little shop had been the beating heart of our neighborhood. It wasn't just a place where people bought their daily loaf. It was where stories were exchanged, where children pressed their noses against the glass to watch dough rise, where lonely souls found comfort in a warm croissant and a kind word. I built it from nothing. When I first rented the tiny corner space on Maple Street, it was little more than cracked walls and a stubborn leak in the ceiling. My late husband, Frank, thought I was crazy. He had shaken his head, smiling the way only he could, when I told him I would turn it into a bakery. "Kelly," he said, "this place smells like mold. Nobody's gonna buy bread here." "Then I'll bake bread so good," I replied, "that it will drown out every other smell in the world." And I did. I rose at dawn, kneaded until my arms ached, and offered free samples to anyone who dared to pass by. Slowly, the neighborhood took notice. Mothers started stopping in after school, laborers before work, retirees for their morning rolls. I remember the first day the line stretched outside the door, how I cried behind the counter, my apron dusted white, as Frank hugged me and whispered, "You did it." Now, 30 years later, the shop had grown from that leaky little hole into a warm, bustling place with 3 employees, 2 ovens, and shelves lined with recipes I had perfected with age. Some customers had been coming for decades, watching my daughter, Sarah, grow up from a girl hiding under the counter to a bride walking down the aisle. Her wedding had been only a few weeks ago. It was beautiful, radiant. Sarah glowed in her dress, her laughter echoing like bells as she promised her life to Michael. I had baked the wedding cake myself, 5 tiers, white as snow, covered in roses of sugared cream. Everyone praised it, but truthfully, it wasn't the cake that filled me with pride. It was watching my daughter step into her future, while my own past, my bakery, still stood strong beside me. Life, I thought, was generous. I had my bread, my customers, and my daughter was happy. What more could a woman of 65 ask for? That morning in the bakery was like any other. The scent of fresh sourdough wafted through the air as I wiped down the counters. The bell above the door chimed as Mrs. Alvarez, one of my oldest customers, shuffled in. "Morning, Kelly," she said, leaning on her cane. "Do you still have that rye I love?" "For you, always," I smiled, slipping a loaf into a paper bag. The day flowed like countless others before it. Yet beneath the hum of the ovens and the clinking of coffee cups, I felt a quiet, unspoken satisfaction. I had weathered hardships, Frank's death, lean financial years, even the competition of supermarkets. Still, I was here. Still, people chose my bread. And in that moment, as the clock ticked toward noon, I thought nothing could threaten the life I had built. But I was wrong. What I didn't know then was that in the shadows of my daughter's marriage, a storm was brewing, a storm in the shape of another woman who called herself family, but whose heart carried nothing but greed. That day, as I swept flour from the floor and locked up the shop for the night, I had no idea that everything I had worked for, all 30 years of sweat and patience, would soon be ripped from my hands in the most humiliating way possible.
It began with a knock that wasn't really a knock. It was more of a pounding, the kind that carries no patience, no respect. I had just finished loading the morning's loaves into the display case. The bakery smelled of butter and cinnamon, a sweetness that usually softened even the hardest moods. But that knock, no, that pounding, cut through everything like a blade. When I opened the door, she stood there. Margaret, my son-in-law's mother. I had seen her plenty of times before, of course. At the engagement party, at the wedding, in those awkward family dinners where she tried to turn every conversation into a lecture about how her side of the family had more refinement, more money, more everything. She was a tall woman, angular, always dressed as though she were walking into a courtroom. And her eyes, sharp, cold, the kind that never softened even when she smiled. "Kelly," she said, brushing past me without waiting for an invitation. Her perfume, something harsh and floral, filled the air of my humble shop. She looked around, wrinkling her nose, as if the smell of flour and yeast somehow offended her. "Still baking, I see." I tried to keep my voice even. "Yes, Margaret, this is my shop. You know that." She didn't respond. Instead, she turned, her heels clicking against the tile floor, and fixed me with that steely gaze. "We need to discuss finances." I raised an eyebrow. "Finances?" "The wedding," she said flatly, as though the word itself were heavy enough to silence me. "You saw how extravagant it was. The hall, the music, the catering. I spared no expense for my son. After all, Michael deserves the very best." "Yes, it was a beautiful wedding," I replied carefully. I remembered every detail, the laughter, the champagne, the way Sarah's eyes glistened with happiness. But I also remembered what I had contributed, the cake, the table linens I sewed by hand, and more money than I had ever thought I'd part with. My savings, meant for my retirement, had been chipped away from my daughter's joy. And I had done it gladly. "Beautiful, yes," Margaret said, her lips curling into something that was not quite a smile. "But beauty costs money, a lot of money, and it is only fair that both sides of the family contribute equally." "I already contributed," I said firmly, folding my flour-dusted hands in front of me. Margaret tilted her head. "Some cake and old fabric is hardly equal, Kelly. Let's be realistic. I've run the numbers, and you owe me $70,000. Her words hit me like a blow. 70,000? I laughed, though it came out more as a disbelieving gasp. "Margaret, that's absurd. I don't owe you anything." Her eyes narrowed. "You do. Your daughter married into my family, and in our family, appearances matter. Do you think people didn't notice how much more my side contributed? How it was my money that kept everything shining?" I felt my blood run hot. Sarah's wedding wasn't a competition. It was about love, about them starting their life together. And as for appearances, what do I care what people think? That made her lips tighten. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so it carried a venom meant for me alone. "You will pay, Kelly, one way or another. If you can't keep up, maybe you don't deserve to hold on to this quaint little shop of yours. After all, 30 years is a long time. Perhaps it's time someone with a bit more ambition took it over." Her meaning was clear. It wasn't just money she wanted. She wanted my bakery, my life's work. I squared my shoulders, though inside my heart was pounding. I told myself she was bluffing, that her words were just bluster, that nothing could take away what I had built with my own two hands. But deep inside, a seed of unease took root. I should have known then that Margaret wasn't the kind of woman who made empty threats. It happened so quickly I almost thought I was dreaming.
One day I was kneading dough, the smell of warm bread filling the air, the bell above the bakery door ringing with each familiar customer who had been coming to me for years. And the next, everything I had built, every ounce of sweat and love poured into this place, was gone. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesday mornings were when the retired teachers from the neighborhood stopped by for coffee and sweet rolls. I had risen before dawn, prepared the dough, and set the ovens going. But I had to leave, just for a day. My daughter Sarah wasn't feeling well, and though she insisted it was nothing, a mother doesn't ignore those instincts. I closed up the shop early, covered the trays, and left with the key in my pocket, certain that everything would be waiting for me when I returned. But when I came back the next morning, the key didn't fit. At first, I thought I was simply tired, fumbling with the lock. But no, the lock was new. The door was painted a different color. My heart dropped into my stomach. I stepped back onto the sidewalk, staring at the building that had been mine for 3 decades. The soft cream facade had been repainted a harsh shade of red. The window that had proudly displayed Kelly's bread and butter for years was bare. My sign gone, replaced by bold new lettering, Margaret's Fine Bakes. I staggered forward, knocking on the glass like a desperate stranger. One of my girls, little Rosa, who had been working for me since she was 17, appeared behind the counter. But she didn't smile. She looked down, ashamed, and disappeared into the back. Moments later, Margaret herself appeared. She opened the door just a crack, enough to let her voice slip through. "Kelly," she said smoothly, "you look surprised." Surprised? I could hardly breathe. "What have you done?" She widened the door with a show of elegance, gesturing behind her. The inside of my bakery was unrecognizable. My curtains were gone, my shelves painted, rearranged. Even the smell was different. She had filled the air with that artificial vanilla, masking the honest scent of yeast and butter. "This is progress," she said simply. "Your time with this place is over. I've taken over the lease. I've brought in new staff, new branding. It's what the shop needed." "You what?" My voice cracked. "You can't just take it. This bakery is mine. Mine." Margaret tilted her head, smiling that infuriating little smile. "Oh, but I can. While you were off playing caretaker, the landlord agreed to my offer, a better offer. And your dear employees, well, they've chosen to stay on with me. They want security, Kelly. They want a boss who knows how to run things properly." I felt my knees weaken. You changed the locks? You stole my shop in the middle of the night?" "Don't be so dramatic," she replied, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Think of it as a transition. Surely at your age, you must be ready to rest. Bake for your grandchildren instead. Leave the business to someone capable." Her words burned worse than fire. I wanted to scream, to claw the smugness off her face. Instead, I stood there, trembling, my heart breaking in silence. Behind her, the ovens roared, not mine anymore. The sound cut into me like a knife. I turned and walked away, my legs heavy, my eyes blurred with tears. People on the street stared. I must have looked like a woman who had lost everything, and in truth, I had. That night, I sat in my empty kitchen at home, staring at my flour-dusted hands. 30 years of sweat, of rising before the sun, of missed holidays, of bread made with love and patience. All gone. Margaret thought she had won. She thought she had humiliated me, pushed me into the shadows to fade away quietly. But as I sat there in the silence, something hardened inside me. I wasn't finished. If Margaret wanted a war, then a war she would have. I didn't sleep that night. The darkness in my small apartment pressed against me like a weight, but it also gave me clarity. I had been angry before, at customers, at the weather, at the oven, when it didn't rise just right.
But this was different. This was betrayal in its purest form. Someone had taken what was mine, my work, my legacy, my life's meaning, and they had done it without a second thought. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat at the tiny kitchen table, hands wrapped around the warmth, thinking. Margaret thought she could intimidate me with her money, her connections, her false confidence. She thought she could repaint my shop, change the locks, fire the people who had stood beside me for years, and I would crumble quietly into obscurity. She was wrong. I spent the night plotting, like I used to plan a new recipe, testing each step in my mind. First, I needed information. I needed to know exactly what Margaret had done, what she had claimed to the landlord, what permits she had pulled to legally justify this theft. Every misstep she had made, every form filed incorrectly, every small oversight, that was where her weakness would lie. By morning, I had a plan. I would not confront her directly, not yet. I would gather allies, people who could wield authority when I could not. The inspectors, the local council, the health and safety officials. Margaret had made a critical mistake. She assumed her wealth and charm could override laws and regulations. She had overlooked the fact that regulations, no matter how small, were impartial. I started with the shop itself. I walked past the windows, unseen, observing. The paint was uneven in places. The ovens, though new, had been installed improperly, too close to the walls, violating fire codes. The ventilation system was tampered with, likely to save costs. And the employees she had hired were clearly untrained in proper food handling. Every corner of that shop betrayed neglect and carelessness. I could see the inspector's notes forming in my mind, a roadmap for Margaret's downfall. The next morning, I called every relevant authority. I spoke to the health department, detailing my observations without revealing myself at first. I hinted at possible violations, safety hazards, and misleading business permits. I didn't need to tell them my story in full. The evidence would speak for itself. And then I waited. Margaret continued her charade, confident, smug, hosting tasting events, posting on social media, flaunting my shop as her own. She had no idea that an invisible hand was about to dismantle everything she had stolen. The inspectors arrived quietly. First one, then two, then a small team, armed with clipboards, cameras, and tape measures. They went through every inch of the bakery, scrutinizing ovens, walls, floors, ventilation, sanitation. She tried to intercept them, her voice rising in outrage. But the officers were professional. They asked for permits, reviewed documents, and noted violations. Every false claim she had made was cataloged meticulously. By late afternoon, they issued a notice, a massive fine for improper licensing, health violations, and unsafe renovations. Margaret's face turned a bright crimson as the officers handed her the official documents. I stood across the street, unseen, watching her fury boil over while the weight of the law crushed her confidence like a rolling pin on dough. It was not enough for me just to reclaim my shop legally. I wanted her to understand the full measure of her audacity, the humiliation she had inflicted on me and my loyal employees would return to her tenfold. As she argued with the inspectors, threatening lawyers and lawsuits, I smiled quietly, a slow, deliberate smile. For the first time in weeks, I felt the warmth of control, the satisfaction that comes not from revenge alone, but from the certainty of justice. Margaret had underestimated me. She assumed that her wealth and audacity could overpower my decades of dedication. But she hadn't counted on my patience, my knowledge, or my unwillingness to bow to anyone who had no right to take what was mine. And soon, I would reclaim everything.
The following week was a whirlwind. Margaret had not anticipated the storm she had unleashed. After the inspector's visits, the bakery was effectively frozen. She couldn't operate legally, and her newly hired employees began to drift away, scared of working in a place under such scrutiny. Orders were canceled, social media complaints started piling up, and the fine was growing daily with every violation noted. I watched from my small apartment, sipping tea and feeling a sense of calm that I had not known since the theft. It was not just satisfaction, it was strategy coming to fruition. Every violation, every misstep Margaret had made was a weapon. I had spent 30 years building this bakery, and no half-baked attempt to steal it would go unpunished. Finally, Margaret called me. I didn't answer immediately. I let the phone ring, imagining her voice trembling with desperation, and then I picked up. "Kelly," she said, sharp and forced, "I think we need to talk." "Yes," I said softly, letting the quiet tension stretch between us. "We do." She tried to speak first, but I cut her off with a calmness that made her stumble. "Let me make something perfectly clear. This shop is mine. Everything in it belongs to me. You cannot operate it. You cannot claim it. And the fines are still accumulating. If you want to resolve this, you will do it on my terms." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I imagined her fuming, pacing, her polished nails tapping the desk in frustration. "You're insane," she finally said. "You can't. This is outrageous. I've already invested so much." "You've invested nothing. I have invested decades. I built this with my hands, my heart, my blood. You will compensate me if you want to continue even remotely pretending this bakery belongs to you. And I have a price." A long silence followed. Then reluctantly she asked, "And what is your price?" I allowed a small, deliberate pause. Then, with calm authority, I named it. 5 times the original market value. Every penny was calculated to reflect the humiliation, the stress, the reckless arrogance she had displayed. Margaret gasped audibly. "You're insane," she repeated, but this time there was fear under the anger. "No one will pay that. No one can." I leaned back in my chair, feeling a surge of quiet triumph. "Then I guess you'll be out of the bakery forever." Another silence, longer this time. Finally she whispered, almost breaking, "Fine. Fine. I'll do it. I'll pay your price." I didn't celebrate loudly. I didn't need to. The victory was already mine, sealed in the way she had no choice but to obey. The bakery was returning to me, and this time, not just in ownership, but in dignity. When I returned the next day, the shop was mine again. The locks were changed, the original sign restored, and my loyal employees, who had been hesitant to step back in, returned as if nothing had ever shaken their loyalty. The ovens smelled familiar, the counters warm under my hands, the aroma of fresh dough filling every corner. Margaret never came back. I imagine she stayed far away, counting the money she had thrown at a problem she could not control, but she did not dare return. As I kneaded dough, feeling the texture of life under my fingers, I realized something profound. This wasn't just about money or a shop. It was about respect, about proving that age and experience carry power, that nothing built with integrity can be taken lightly. For the first time in weeks, I smiled freely. My bakery, my life's work, was safe. And my hands, covered in flour and warmth, were my own again. The morning sun filtered through the windows of my bakery, warm and golden, as if celebrating my return. I unlocked the door with my own key, breathing in the familiar scents of flour, yeast, and butter, scents that had been mine for 30 years and would remain mine. The ovens gleamed under the light, my counter stood ready, and the shelves were once again lined with the breads, pastries, and rolls that had earned the love and loyalty of the neighborhood. It was quiet at first, almost reverent. My employees arrived shortly after, their smiles tentative but hopeful, as if testing to see whether the nightmare had truly ended. When they saw me standing behind the counter, the baker's apron wrapped around my waist, hands dusted with flour, the relief in their eyes was palpable. Rosa, wiping her hands on her apron, whispered, "Welcome back, boss." I smiled. "Thank you, Rosa. It feels good to be home." Word traveled fast. The customers who had watched my bakery change hands and feared its demise returned in droves. Faces I hadn't seen in years appeared at the door. Old regulars, neighbors, even the shy couple who had bought their first loaf here when they moved into the area. They were here not just for the bread, but for the symbol of resilience, the proof that what was built with love and integrity could not be stolen. Margaret's attempt to humiliate me had failed utterly. Not only had she lost the shop, but she had also lost the respect of everyone who had witnessed her arrogance, and she had paid dearly to get back what she thought she could control. I spent that first week restoring every corner of the bakery to its formal self, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The paint was fresh, the counters polished, and every oven tested and aligned. I took my time kneading the dough, folding it, letting it rest just so, feeling in every step the satisfaction of reclaiming what was mine. By the end of the week, I allowed myself a quiet celebration. I baked my favorite pastries, lined them up in neat rows, and poured cups of tea for my employees. We sat together in the small break room, laughing, sharing stories, and savoring the moment. For a while, it was just us, the bread, and the sweet knowledge that justice had been served. Outside, the neighborhood seemed brighter, more alive. Children ran past the windows, peering in with curiosity, while the smell of fresh bread drifted through the streets like a promise. I realized then that this bakery was more than my livelihood. It was my legacy, a testament to persistence, courage, and the refusal to be silenced. That night, after locking the doors and extinguishing the lights, I stood for a long time on the sidewalk, looking up at the little sign that read, "Kelly's Bread and Butter." The streets were quiet, the stars beginning to peek through the darkening sky. I felt a deep peace settle over me, a joy that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with reclaiming my dignity, my work, and my life. In the end, I had proven something to Margaret, to my employees, to my community, and most importantly, to myself. Age, experience, and patience are formidable forces, and when combined with resolve, they can overcome even the most audacious attempts at theft, cruelty, and humiliation. I turned the key in the lock one last time, a soft smile on my lips, and whispered to the empty bakery, "Welcome home, Kelly. You did it. You've won." And with that, I walked inside, letting the warmth of the ovens, the scent of fresh bread, and the life I had fought so hard to protect envelop me completely.